Hello, and thank you for joining today's webcast. We're about to begin Hey Financial Services. Get serious about social or get spanked. I'm going to begin with a few points of housekeeping. By now you should be in the event console. You should see the title slide for today's presentation, a Twitter stream, and a Q&A widget open. You can tweet about this webcast during the presentation with the hashtag #SeriousAboutSocial. Please also submit questions during the webcast through the Q&A widget, and we'll address those that we can get to at the end of the presentation. Please also note there are additional resources available to you at the bottom of your screen. In the green resources folder, you'll find today's slide deck. Everybody asks about that, so there it is, and some other great social customer experience white papers from Lithium. You'll also find our speaker bios, more on Lithium and our products, and of course, a way to contact us if you'd like to set up a meeting. Right now, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker today will be Deanna Oppenheimer. We're terrifically thrilled to have her with us today. She's recognized globally as one of the decade's most influential leaders in financial services, and she's been ranked one of the 2 most powerful women in banking. Deanna has had amazing success in numerous executive roles with Barclays, including during which the firm achieved double-digit financial growth and achieved #1 ranking in customer satisfaction. She's a frequent speaker at national and international forums and a cum laude graduate of the University of Puget Sound and a graduate of the Advanced Executive Program at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. We also have with us today another Kellogg grad, Katie Kime. Katie serves as Lithium's Chief Marketing Officer. She leads all strategic marketing activities for the company, including branding, positioning, communications, and go-to-market strategy. Also our customer acquisition programs. She's a frequent speaker at key industry events and a guest columnist for Ad Age and B2B Marketer. She holds an MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management, where she was an Austin Scholar. So before I kick things over to Deanna, who will be our first speaker, I'd like to present you guys with a small poll. We like to get a feel for who we have in the audience, and we also like to give you a sense of who you have in the audience as far as how your social programs are going. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, tell us about your social media strategy. Is your social media strategy solid? Does it need improvement, or does it embarrass you? And we won't tell who you are. These are anonymous results. So if it embarrasses you, go ahead and confess that to us. And I'm going to give it a few minutes here. This is what's called vamping in the biz. And I am starting to get some response, and I'm going to give it just a few more minutes. Just a couple more seconds. I don't have a ton of responses yet from the audience. Don't be shy. These are all the people that are embarrassed that are responding.
Aren't responding.
All right. So let's refresh the results, and I'm going ahead and ready to push these to the audience here. And it looks like lots of you are admitting to needing improvement. Not that many of you are admitting that it embarrasses you. About 20% of you say your social media strategy is solid, and I would say that that's probably in line with our thinking. Hello, and thank you for joining today's webcast. We're about to begin Hey Financial Services. Get serious about social or get spanked. I'm going to begin with a few points of housekeeping. By now you should be in the event console. You should see the title slide for today's presentation, a Twitter stream, and a Q&A widget open. You can tweet about this webcast during the presentation with the hashtag #SeriousAboutSocial. Please also submit questions during the webcast through the Q&A widget, and we'll address those that we can get to at the end of the presentation. Please also note there are additional resources available to you at the bottom of your screen. In the green resources folder, you'll find today's slide deck. Everybody asks about that, so there it is, and some other great social customer experience white papers from Lithium. You'll also find our speaker bios, more on Lithium and our products, and of course, a way to contact us if you'd like to set up a meeting. Right now, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker today will be Deanna Oppenheimer. We're terrifically thrilled to have her with us today. She's recognized globally as one of the decade's most influential leaders in financial services, and she's been ranked one of the 2 most powerful women in banking. Deanna has had amazing success in numerous executive roles with Barclays, including during which the firm achieved double-digit financial growth and achieved #1 ranking in customer satisfaction. She's a frequent speaker at national and international forums and a cum laude graduate of the University of Puget Sound and a graduate of the Advanced Executive Program at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. We also have with us today another Kellogg grad, Katie Keim. Katie serves as Lithium's Chief Marketing Officer. She leads all strategic marketing activities for the company, including branding, positioning, communications, and go-to-market strategy. Also our customer acquisition programs. She's a frequent speaker at key industry events and a guest columnist for Ad Age and B2B Marketer. She holds an MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management, where she was an Austin Scholar. So before I kick things over to Deanna, who will be our first speaker, I'd like to present you guys with a small poll. We like to get a feel for who we have in the audience, and we also like to give you a sense of who you have in the audience as far as how your social programs are going. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, tell us about your social media strategy. Is your social media strategy solid? Does it need improvement, or does it embarrass you? And we won't tell who you are. These are anonymous results. So if it embarrasses you, go ahead and confess that to us. And I'm going to give it a few minutes here. This is what's called vamping in the biz. And I am starting to get some response, and I'm going to give it just a few more minutes. Just a couple more seconds. I don't have a ton of responses yet from the audience. Don't be shy. These are all the people that are embarrassed that are responding.
Aren't responding.
All right. So let's refresh the results, and I'm going ahead and ready to push these to the audience here. And it looks like lots of you are admitting to needing improvement. Not that many of you are admitting that it embarrasses you. About 20% of you say your social media strategy is solid, and I would say that that's probably in line with our thinking about how mature this market is in general. So thanks for that. I have one more question for you guys, and this one is, if you're not doing so well, or if you feel like you can use improvement, so 80% of you feel like you could use improvement, or you're embarrassed, and if you're not doing well, what's holding you back? Is it too risky? You know, you're afraid people are going to say bad things. Is it too confusing? There's too many channels and platforms, or is it too fluffy? I don't see the ROI. So what do you think is holding your organization back in making social media investments? And I am seeing some folks start to respond. I can get a couple more responses here. Okay, they're starting to add up. Thanks for participating. Couple more responses here. See if things are changing. All right. I'm going to go ahead and push these results to the audience and show you how you guys are doing. So, surprisingly, for folks interested in the financial services industry, risk is not your biggest stumbling block. It's too confusing, almost neck and neck, too confusing or too fluffy. Very interesting. So I think you guys are going to really like our program today because we're going to unconfuse you. and we're going to show you that the results from social aren't remotely close to fluffy. There's a lot of great things going on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Deanna, who's on the line with us. Deanna Oppenheimer, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Bonnie, and hello to everyone. I am pleased to be here with Katie talking about the next innovations in banking because by way of background, I've actually been in the banking business for nearly 30 years. And about 20 of that I spent at Washington Mutual during its big growth phase between about 1985 to 2005. And from that time, we grew that business from about less than $2 billion in assets to about $370 billion. We did that through, at that point in time, 35 acquisitions and integrations. And that gave us a lot of experience in channel design and innovation. And indeed, the early 2000s garnered us awards as being the most innovative company in America and one of the top 40 store concepts in the world. And so from there, I left and went to Barclays in 2005 and was there for nearly 7 years. And there as CEO of the UK Retail Bank, was charged with turning around that business and guiding it through the financial crisis. And at that point in time, we really did a lot of work in rolling out mobile, rolling out Internet, and innovating on integrating almost an omni-channel approach to our financial services. I also, at that point in time, was made Vice Chair of Global Retail Banking, where I really went around the world and shared best practices and innovation that was going on everywhere from Africa to Asia, back in the States, and of course in Europe. Now, last year, it had been terrific having that great big corporate experience, but as I looked out, I saw the trends that are really emerging that I'm going to talk with you today about what are, I think, very, very fundamental changes coming to banking. And so I geared up CameoWorks, which is my advisory company, and took all of that experience in retail banking to apply to a broader set of companies, not only banks and other financial institutions, but technology companies, retailers, because again, these fundamental shifts are going to run through all those industries. And what we do really now is we match West Coast innovation with global commerce, primarily in the U.S. and Europe. So I'm spending a bulk of my time traveling among those continents and seeing a lot of what's going on in the industry right now. And so it's great to have an opportunity to share some of that with you today. Next slide, please. So I have to say, again, for my entire career, I would say this is as challenging as any time in financial services. And I know that many of you on the call today would probably agree with me on that assessment. You know, the financial crisis coupled with the next evolution of technology has created a fundamental secular change that will not return to the way it was, in my opinion. Even when the economies recover, even when interest rates rise, we are in a fundamentally different way of doing businesses, not only in financial services, but you're seeing it run through virtually every consumer industry as well. And of these, if you look at that slide, let me just highlight a few points on those. Trust is at an all-time low. It went from high double digits down to single digits. It's actually recovering for banks and financial institutions, but it still is very, very challenged at that point. And regaining that trust becomes very, very important to go into the next phase of innovation and development. Cost pressures, and I don't have to tell you this, again, are at an all-time high. As you've come through and you've taken out of your P&Ls the recovery of loan loss reserves, you basically have the pressure I'll talk about in a minute on the top line. Really, it's been attacking it on the cost line. Now, in my experience, there's two ways that you can do cost savings. One is where you actually create value for the organization, and that's by true end-to-end process simplification, really simplifying that business, making it more transferable and, again, more able for the customer to interact in an easy way. But the challenge is, because the cost pressures have come so short term, is that often you degrade the business by slashing and burning. The third element is technology, and there's a triple whammy that I can definitely sympathize with. The legacy maintenance, core banking systems are not the sexy things that they were back in the day, but they're still there. They still have to be the major engine to run your businesses, and those require maintenance. From a lot of acquisition integrations, as my experience had, I know that not everybody got all of the old systems decommissioned. So there's costs and there's complexity and there's challenges in that. And now we're on to deploying the brave new world of mobile apps, digital cloud platforms, and big data. So again, the whole focus and challenge around technology, how you understand it, what makes it less confusing, as you pointed out in your earlier poll, that is a key component of the challenge you face today. Regulators, again, post-crisis, the regulators will say themselves that they're doing invasive regulation. They're getting much more focused on getting much more proactive into the business. Again, I don't have to tell you that. You live that every day for those of you in banks. And it will be coming in a much larger degree as well to insurance companies. But the challenge in regulation is not whether it's high touch, light touch, very invasive or not. The challenge in regulation is when it's not consistent. And that is what we're seeing certainly in Europe as well as in the U.S. The regulators themselves are going through change. They're changing the way that they operate. They are then changing that level of predictability and consistency, both for themselves as well as for those that they regulate. And finally, I think one of the most significant challenges is that revenue growth is very, very challenging in all fronts, particularly in banks. I think you'll see this developing more in insurance as well, but clearly there's a revenue challenge, particularly in the interest rate environment that we find ourselves in and for everything else that we talked about. Next slide, please. But the most fundamental, and in my view, the key thing that is driving my comments that says this is a secular and not a cyclical change is the customer himself. Digital has arrived with a vengeance, and it is not just within the under 30 group. As you can see, one of my favorite stats on this slide, 90% of people under 30 sleep with their smartphone. But it is all ages, all demographics, all parts of the globe. Now we are at a point where we almost have a majority of the population, and clearly all the Western countries, having a smartphone. But the interesting thing on that is 1/3 of them were purchased in the last year. So that means that is an escalating viral trend that is just taking off and going. And that is what is driving this. 95% of customer interactions are going to be in retail banking, will be digital by 2020. A mere 6 or 7 years away. 1 billion mobile banking users globally by the end of 2013. And one of my most amazing data stats that every time I say it, it just completely blows my mind, is since I left Barclays nearly 2 years ago, 90% of all the data in the world has been created in just the past 2 years. And that's been driven by, as you know, the high level of speed and ability of computers now to compute and use that data. And in banking, that is challenging on everything from pricing to fraud to a variety of different things. So I guess the key thing is not only that the customer has changed, but the tools that are at the customer's disposal that they are using every day in the palm of their hand has changed as well. Next slide, please. So those customers, if you really think about it, and when I used to think about customers as I was running a big retail bank, that really there were 3 areas that were in the purview of the bank. And that was pretty much the sole purview of the financial institution. And that is in the transaction area. Pretty much banks and insurance companies and asset managers own the transaction. As a result, we owned all the data that was there. We didn't always get to that data, but we did have it. And we always talked about how much data we had and how great that data was. how we put it to use was sometimes challenging. And in essence, then, we owned the relationship. However, what's happening now is that with this customer power that they have at their fingertips, their wallets are fragmenting by their choice, not only between your conventional competitors, other banks, other insurance companies, but also with new entrants and new players that have entered the market. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these new players now and spend time on them individually, but rather there's a collective takeaway that I want you to think about. The innovation has been happening on the customer interface. And that's where the banks, for all the challenges that we've had with multiple systems, multiple technology, verticals and silos and non-integrated systems, it's that customer interface that has awoken the sleeping giant of customer intimacy with all those customers. So whether it's Square and PayPal and transactions, or whether it's Mint and money maps and personal capital in the data space, and whether it's Lending Club or eToro, the customer has taken control unlike we've ever seen before. And again, that means that each one of these little vertical slices are slicing off bits of the customer intimacy away from the bank, away from the insurance company. And in the insurance business, you have the added challenge in many of your lines of aggregators and what that is doing to both the distribution as well as the choice coming in. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to all be lost. The benefit of big financial institutions is you have big customer bases. You know, at Barclays when I was there, the customer base that I ran was 15 million customers. Those are big scale opportunities. But it does mean that you have to change in the way that you are tapping, thinking about them, and engaging with them. If we could go to the next slide. So what should banks be thinking about? If I were sitting out there in your shoes today, and as I talk to a lot of you and a lot of others, and have the opportunity to advise and give counsel to a variety of different people, what are the key things that I would be concerned about? Well, if there's one thing that you remember today, it's very simply this. The canoe is plummeting over the falls. I mean, the tipping point has tipped. We all sat around in conferences for the past 10, 15 years and talked about the Internet's going to erode our business. It's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to come. It is here, and it's here through that active mobile engagement that I talked about earlier. So that means that there are bold actions that are required, in my opinion, in taking control. And the first place where it needs to be taken control from is the annual budget cycle. And quite frankly, I think until you find a variety of different ways, and there are some innovative ways you can do it, you don't have to totally dump one for the other, but you must shift investment spend to rebalance from running the bank to changing the bank. Now, in my experience, depending on where we were at acquisition integrations, just to turn the lights on, just to run the bank, sucked up about 80 to 85% of the budget. You add on regulatory requirements onto that, and you're up to virtually demand that outstrips that. But even in those situations, there must be carve-outs for budgets that you can use to change the bank. The third is a focus of leadership that I both practiced through my career as well as I have been focusing on and doing a lot of work on developing at this point in time in my advisory business. And I call it leading on the diagonal. But quite simply, if leaders don't change the way that we lead and manage, only a few companies will actually capture and recapture these customer wallet losses and be able to enjoy sustained success. And the reason is this, is that in banks and big financial institutions, insurance companies, wealth management firms, asset management companies, even in investment banks, whatever of those large institutions you come from. And even if you're a smaller institution, we tend to gravitate this way into the vertical. And that means we create management verticals. You are the people that work for me, and in my career I had anywhere from 25 to 50,000 of them that reported up to me, and everything's created in that vertical. And so what we do then is we spend a lot of time going across the horizontal, hopefully, interacting with our peers to try and work out and inform and do that. And what that sucks up is a lot of time. A lot of time, a lot of interaction, a lot of effort. Now, innovation, that is not a conducive thing for innovation. Vertical time hierarchies. It's great and very needed to run administrative, to run the status quo, to run the bank mentality. But what is needed for true innovation right now are informal teams that can innovate on a whim, can do that on a dime. And if we look at ways to do that, next slide please, communities are one way to lead on the diagonal. And what that means is you are basically engaging people from outside, from inside, from all layers of the organization, from all different aspects of the organization to actually solve a very real, very pressing problem at that point in time. In my experience, actually, banks do that really well when there's a crisis. And I can remember times where I would pull together teams, whether we were in a PR crisis, whether we were in a natural disaster crisis, and we were able to pull these diagonal teams together very, very quickly. But I would encourage you to think of what you're in right now is a crisis, and to think about leading and managing in that way. So one source of innovation includes third parties, where you actually can effectively partnership with smaller companies that have a key capability that you don't have. And all the way back from the mid-90s through the whole last dot-com era, I actually ran innovative centers within Washington Mutual and then in Barclays to get this innovation going. And we very effectively used that partnering with third parties to do things that we could not do within the confines of both our culture and our organizational limitations that we had. The second is to think diagonally with all stakeholders, certainly regulators, unions, and most definitely customers. Gone are the days where we can actually develop product and just push it out to customers. We have to engage them very, very actively. And your customers in the new world that we're living in are not only those who buy your products outside, but those who sell, manufacture, and create your products inside your colleagues. And so if we go to the next slide, one of the key things, and this is the too fluffy comment that I heard earlier, is we often have thought about communication as being kind of a fluffy thing. It's a nice to have. But in the world that we live in of complexity, where you can't just command and control down the vertical now, you don't fully own the relationship, it's gone from a fluffy to an actual fundamental. Indeed, I would maintain, in my experience, if I would not have had as effective of communication, of engagement, that we would have made less money, had more problems, and had more challenges along the way. And that's because the consumer now is demanding in all walks of life information sharing and transparency. In the old world, information was power. In the new world, information shared is power. And that is a fundamental that is with us. Authenticity also means that we have to be willing to make ourselves vulnerable, and as leaders as well as businesses. And again, you just see any point at now, a customer will come up, look at it in the travel business. They're going to look at every review that comes on every travel website before they decide to go to that particular hotel or take that cruise. And that means trying to come out with the we're perfect, we don't want to show our warts, is something that we don't have the luxury of doing anymore. Because a consumer will tell you that if you come out first with the challenges and everything that you have, that your advocates will jump in and actually defend you along the way. Next slide. So that's why social customer experience matters to me. That's why it's different now. It's not a little off to the side, nice to have. It's fundamentally the way that all these customers across every age demographic, every income demographic are now being rapidly trained to work. So you have Amazon to Uber driving banking customer expectations. You know, if I have those apps in my hand and then I go into the banking app and it's clunky, it doesn't let me do the same thing, it doesn't let me make comments, it doesn't let me review what other people have said, I'm judging the bank against those apps and not the bank down the street. The second is that customer engagement follows the transaction channel. Now in the past, and this is not the distant past, this is within the last 5 years, 80 to 85% of all transactions were done at the branch. So really that's where you needed to have engaged colleagues. You had an individual, personalized one-on-one interaction. You saw that statistic I said earlier. When 95% of those transactions are going to be digital, that's going to be where customer engagement is going to happen, at the digital channel, at that digital interaction. Or if they're doing an omni-channel where they're maybe looking and researching digitally and then walking in that branch or picking up the phone, they still are going to look at the experience of, was that consistent? Did that meet my expectation across the way? And finally, as I mentioned earlier, to engage colleagues of the future, they will be used to being in this same digital world and they will look for that. And so to be able to not only engage but retain the best and brightest talent, which fundamentally, in my experience, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do any change or innovation or win. Secondly, you're going to do it at a much lower cost basis, and I think you already know that you know, an in-person transaction would be around 10 times the cost of a digital transaction. And finally, competition is going to drive you there. And it's not the competitors that you've always looked at, the bank down the street, the insurance agency across town. It's basically all these competitors that are coming in from the side. So to find out more about how Lithium is looking at that, let me now turn it over to you, Katie. Thanks very much.
Deanna, excellent. Thank you. I think one of the things we're so excited about having you here is that for those of us that sit here in Silicon Valley, we tend to see the world as if we're sitting in Silicon Valley, and we know that's not the case. Particularly, I'm sure we have a number of people on the phone from all over the world, New York, London, et cetera, who are saying, well, you don't really understand the context of what I'm sitting in. I'm sitting with regulators. I'm sitting with people that are quite conservative. I'm sitting with people that aren't in the whirlwind of the valley. So I really appreciate the perspective you're bringing. One of the things for those on the phone that is most dear to us at Lithium as we talk about working with the world's leading brands to unlock the passion of their customers. And we use passion pretty intently because passion can, as you know, be excitement and inspiration. It can also be sometimes disappointment or frustration. But there's no doubt about one thing. I actually have kids in a private school, and one of the things that the headmaster used to say is nothing better than talking about kids and your money. You're incredibly invested emotionally, and so clearly if we take the money side of that equation, consumers are very passionate about how they spend their money, invest their money, et cetera. And as we got thinking about financial services, next slide, we like to look at what the industry dynamics are in play. If you think about what Deanna said, low NPS and trust, we look at customers at scale, which I think social technologies are incredibly powerful for. And soon as you add complexity for the consumer, there's a range of customer questions, inquiries, exploration, service that needs to be managed. And the economic dynamics, I think, prompt brands to take action. And those economic advantages can be through revenue, or they can be mitigating disadvantages in the fact of churn or the cost of customers switching away from you. And so if you were to think about those features clearly in the context of this call, you would say, yeah, some of those things are very true for financial services. But what's interesting, if you go to the next slide, is that's really the dimensions that we've seen in communication service providers. I'm going to apologize here for our acronyms, but if you look at the telecom space, cable, mobile, even landline phones and our customer base, these have been some of the most innovative customers that we have in thinking about social customer experience. And I think it's for the previous slide that I showed about all those dimensions that are driving their business. You know, they've had churns. Churn is, you know, economically very painful for them. The NPS and satisfaction levels have been low. They are regulated businesses, and they need to be thinking about how to tap that in the right way. But they've got real motives for taking action. And so this data here comes from a survey that was run by Telesperience earlier in the year in advance of Mobile World Congress, where they're asking communication service providers, why would you invest in these social technologies? And what they shared was, you know, clearly loyalty. How do I engage these customers and keep them in a position where they want to keep doing business with my company? Almost 70% are doing or plan to do something or are doing it. They also are looking for innovation. You know, how can I service the needs not of my customers of what they want to know to be able to do today, but what they want to be able to do tomorrow? How am I thinking about including their voice in what the company is going to deliver to them? And then clearly thinking about operationalizing customer service and driving revenue. So there was real, what I would say, momentum in this market. And for me, this is an indicator of what's happening in financial services, as Deanna pointed out, is that the canoe is over the waterfall, as she said. Now it becomes an issue of what action am I going to take and for what business benefit. Next slide. And so, you know, this is a little bit more from that survey, is that they want to think about scaling their experience through enlisting the help of their customers. You know, 82% of them want to enlist customers to help other customers. If you look at the Lithium customer base, people like Skype, how do you scale your customer service when you have 200 million subscribers without enlisting them to help one another? 82% also said they wanted to do the innovation, as I said. Verizon, as they rolled out a new FiOS cable guide to their residential subscribers, how might they include them in the pre-release of that and showing them the new product and getting additional feedback of how they might improve it. 64% want to reduce the support call volume and really meet customers where they are. How does AT&T manage the inquiries that they have without leveraging the digital experience and use a community-like environment to solve the customer service equation? Next slide, Bonnie. But I think right in the middle, besides all these operational and innovation items, is that they realize that they need to use social technologies not only to scale, but to transform the customer experience. And, you know, at our conference this past year, John Bowden from Time Warner was there, and he said that these social technologies actually gives him an opportunity to connect with a new demographic in a new way, and in some ways gives him the freedom to operate in a new dynamic instead of legacy systems, legacy call centers, and quite frankly, legacy reputation, perhaps with an older, more mature demographic. And this gives him a way to transform what they're doing with the customer through these social technologies. And I believe that is the opportunity that the financial services market has in front of them. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about NPS, and clearly, you know, all of us have our own measures in terms of how we're thinking about it, but it is very analogous when we look at what's going on with banking or credit cards or life insurance, and clearly this is symptomatic of, I think what the financial services sector had gone through in 09 and 10. And as Deanna said, consumer satisfaction, consumer trust is at an all-time low, and I think we're seeing this in these sectors. And for me, there's a business imperative that I think starts this conversation. It doesn't start with, we need to be social. That's not a reason of itself. I think social technologies provides an awesome and powerful mechanism to do this, but there's a business driver that says we need to rebuild this relationship with our customer. We need to drive towards greater transparency, towards greater customer service, and we need to do that in a way that can scale and be effective for the bank, and that's why I'm exploring new social technologies. Next slide. And I think the reality is of whether or not you sleep with your phone or your consumers sleep with your phone, what's become more apparent to us as we engage in these account discussions with financial services, you're about as close to a technology provider as it comes. I mean, your customers, they want more peer review sections. They want to be able to ask about products and services. They want to be able to chat with you. They want to be able to compare what it is you're offering. And if you think about that customer dynamic where 89% of our purchase process is starting at a Google search box, they are not going into the branch. They are looking for ways to get smart about data, about the relationship, about services online. And so the bank needs to think about how they're going to serve these customers in a new way. And one of the things that Deanna, when we met and started having this conversation, it was something that I love that she said is that it's become the bank of me, which is I understand Bank X, that this is how you do business with retail or online, but I have my bank in my pocket. I am looking for you to serve me, the bank of me, the things that serve my needs. Next slide. And if we don't think this is happening, we're kidding ourselves. This is a lie that we're telling ourselves in financial services. Now, my apologies. I looked through the list to see if our friends from Bank of America were on the line. I could have easily, unfortunately, taken any kinds of industries where these conversations are happening. Some of us have followed what happened with the British Airways lost luggage, where a customer decided to do promoted tweets to complain about what was happening. The point here is that the conversation is going to go on about your brand. The conversation is going to go on customer to customer. They are going to ask their peers, their experts they trust in the industry, others that have gone before them for feedback. They're going to do it to rant, they're going to do it to get smart, and they're going to do it to make informed purchase decisions. And it's your decision at this point whether or not you're going to engage and own that for advantage for your bank to change the dynamic. Next slide, please. And we see that not only on the forums that we just talked about, but on social channels. And I think the thing that we've heard from the financial services organizations that we've talked to is that we've created a bit of the monster, right? We've agreed that we're going to participate, let's say, on Twitter or Facebook or other places, but the volume is becoming overwhelming. And it's not enough to say that we're there. I mean, HSBC, you can see that we've got some standard responses. The reps are attempting to create a personalized experience here, but in fact we're probably using templates. Or they're running a circuitous, oh, have you done this, have you done this? And there's a few things that you need to know about this customer experience online. And you do, but let me point them out. I mean, first is that it's now. Customers expect a response now. Second, it's very public. So whatever you do at the agent level is not happening in a call center and is going to have a social and digital footprint. Third is that it needs to be trusted. So when you create personalized or canned experiences that aren't personalized, you're eroding trust as opposed to doing what you need to do to build this transparency. And fourth, it's shared. So not only is it public in terms of what we do, is that you run the risk of that experience that's happened with your bank, insurance company, et cetera, is now going to be shared both positively and negatively in terms of consumer to consumer. So next slide, Bonnie. So one of the things that we've seen is we think the market is moving for good reason, and we think the market is moving from the consumer dynamics that we've talked about as well as the economic drivers for the bank. Trust needs to be rebuilt. Products are being commoditized. The experience is being, elevated, or it's requiring that you elevate it because of people like Google and PayPal and Lending Club and all the other offers that they have. Certainly we've been in an economic environment where low interest rates makes it challenging to think about how are we going to get more services in the consumer's portfolio. We certainly know that the retail banks have a place in our business models, but digital is, we're not going back from where customers start. And I think that the change or the wild card has always been regulatory compliance, what's going to be permitted. That's changing. So if we know that the things on the left are drivers that should cause us to take action, it's been regulatory compliance and things that we tell ourselves our bank's not ready, our regulatory environment won't let us, wait till legal hears about it. We want to show you some examples where that's not in fact true to give you a little bit of digital courage to move your bank forward, because I think there's two outputs that you want to get. One, you need to be thinking about dramatically changing that customer experience. And secondly, how can I be creating a trove of content that is trusted and that will serve my consumers when they need it on demand? Next slide. So let's talk about a few stories of what people are doing. I mean, this is where I get so excited about what's happening in the financial space, and certainly Deanna and I have had some great conversations about how this is changing. Barclaycard. Now, I know many of you can open up your wallet sitting on the phone and you're thinking, I need another credit card, right? So Barclaycard decided that if they were going to introduce a credit card called the Ring Card, they wanted to do something different. And the disruptive principle that guided Paul Wilmore and team at Barclaycard was basically how could we turn card members or cardholders into shareholders. And they created this card that said anyone that's a member of this card will actually share in the profits that the card earns. So I want you to think about that for a second. We are going to make decisions collectively as a community as to how this card is going to be run. How are we going to implement fairness, simple principles, transparency? And if you hear Paul tell the story, I was with him in New York last week, he talks about the day that he walked into his boss and said, we've got an idea for this card where we're going to bring consumers into the fold. We're going to share in the profits, and we're going to post the financial statements on the community sites if they're a member. Now, I think that's disruptive thinking, and what they've generated now is a card that is winning all kinds of awards, all kinds of attention, and a rich environment where customers are saying to them, no, I prefer late fees, and here's why. I pay my card on time. Or here's where I want to share the profits back from. Let's vote on the charities. Or here's what I think is the best way for me to invite my friends to join the card. And so for me, this is an incredibly powerful concept about how Barclaycard brought the customer to the center of the business and thought about how they could have a unique offering that would generate goodwill and benefit for the consumer, but also incredible benefit from the bank. And, it's in its first year, but one of the things that Paul will talk about is the closure of accounts and delinquency on the accounts are well below industry averages, providing him with a platform to talk about the economic benefit that this is driving for Barclaycard. Now, it's pretty interesting to say, well, Barclaycard, and certainly Deanna could probably comment on this further, Barclaycard, well, in the U.S., this is more of a an upstart. It's not the core market. Clearly, if we go to the 300-year-old bank in the UK, we're dealing with something different. And what's interesting is kind of taking this experiment. Barclays in the UK have built their own kind of customer innovation platform, and they launched. You can see it in Visible Banking, or maybe we can get the link out. They launched a concept called Your Bank. And they invited customers to say, how can we save you time and not waste your time? Or, what stops this from being accessible as your bank? And, mobile banking, what do you need from us? And they put iPads in the branches, and they launched the site digitally, and they basically created this. They even ran print advertising, basically saying that we're going to be a bank of ideas, and our ideas are going to be driven from you. So, again, a very early stage launch there, but I think someone that's basically taking the concept of putting customers at the center, improving the customer experience, transparency, and NPS, and moving that forward. Next slide. CommSec in Australia, also very exciting. They, as you know, it's one of the largest online brokers in Australia as a part of CommBank, and they created a place for customers to connect with each other and discuss their market, the market, trading strategies, and chatting with other aspects of online trading. They did some incredibly interesting things. One, they integrated stock codes that allowed the customers to basically say, to be able to see latest price information that relates to that stock. They also were allowing customer members to buy and sell stocks from the community, but they were also able to share, the consumers are able to share their own personal sentiment as to what's going on with that stock, if they think it's a buy, if they think it's a hold or a sell, and able for the members to share comments about this. Now, this isn't financial advice. This is not the bank providing financial advice. It's basically allowing the community to generate a point of view about where they are on their trades. And one of the things, if you heard Richard Burns from CommBank talk about it, he's like, we can see a world where, industry analysts, our own buy-side analysts talking about, our perspective on a stock, and then here's the crowd wisdom on a transaction. And I think this is an incredibly powerful concept of, again, driving economics for the bank, which will be increased trade execution, but also driving benefit for the consumers, giving them another perspective on how to think about their investments. Next slide. Finally, wanted to share an example with FICO, and it's interesting. I think, customers like to say, well, most of this crowdsourcing is happening with really sexy brands, and it's all about, cosmetics or something that's consumer related, and I think it's not naturally a place we would think that people would get very passionate about their credit score. But, My FICO is an example of that. This is an incredibly robust community that My FICO has put together. And it's interesting, when they first came to us, they said, we are not permitted to advise consumers on how they can improve their credit score. But as you can imagine, credit scores are incredibly emotional for people who need it when they're trying to build their business or buy a new house, et cetera. And so they created an environment where customers could talk to one another about how to improve their credit scores. Today, there's nearly 8 million messages that are read during the month, and nearly half of the traffic is coming from search engines of people asking questions of, how do I remove, an erroneous charge on my credit report? Or how do I improve my credit score as related to a mortgage? And those questions surface very dynamic content in the community to bring people into the conversation. And so this becomes a really rich avenue of advice for people that need financial guidance. So next slide, those are just a few of the examples. There's a number of other ones that perhaps we're not permitted publicly to talk about, but I want to assure you that we are the ones that deliver on these great customer experiences, both socially and digitally, for a fantastic brand. And financial services is moving. It is not enough to say, oh, that's not really happening in my sector. We serve over 300 iconic brands, and I think what's interesting is if you were to aggregate the network we serve, there's about 75 million unique visitors coming through our properties a month. That's more than LinkedIn. That's more than Yelp. This is a robust set of social conversations that are going on, and our platform is best positioned to help you do that. So I think the next slide, just to close, and we're clearly, obviously, wanting to have a conversation with you if this meets your needs and you're thinking about how to take the next steps. We have two products. One is to help you answer on social channels. Google, Facebook, Twitter, how can we help you triage that kind of tsunami of inquiries and comments that are coming over social channels? The second is, once we've helped you to scale on those social channels, how can you build a destination of your own to host the conversation and build a community around your products and services? That's essentially what Lithium's products do. So again, wanted to hit that at the end, and now I think, Bonnie, I'm sure we've had questions coming in. I want to invite Deanna back, and let's take questions both from Twitter or what you might have gotten in the console. Thanks.
Yeah, we've had some nice questions coming through through the chat interface and also on Twitter, and I'm going to put this first one to Deanna. Couple of questions around, we've talked very broadly about the financial services industry, and maybe if you could just hit some highlights about how retail banks and insurance firms and, or stock trading firms, how are their challenges a little bit different from each other?
Well, thanks, Bonnie. I would say, first off, there are varying degrees. I think a lot of those challenges that I put up there I think are hitting everyone, but I think there are varying degrees. So if you look at between retail banks and insurance, for example, on the retail banking side, they have been, for example, in the UK, covered now by the same regulator where previously insurance was not in there. So I think you're going to start to see regulators are definitely joining up globally. So some of the issues and things that they're finding and would have been exploring through in retail banks would start to go into insurance. The second element is really in areas of insurance, and I mentioned those through my comments, aggregator sites, for example, in motor insurance, have really changed the distribution model in many parts of, again, the UK and the US. So I think that would not have been as big of an impact on retail banks, for example. So the bottom line is that there are varying degrees of differences, but this fundamental customer difference is now kind of blending a lot of those and moving it together much more quickly. So again, if you use examples of before, whether it was with my financial representative, with my banker, with my insurance agent, I only had that channel to really understand what my business was with, and I didn't have a really effective means to aggregate it myself. Now, from some of these various innovations and things that are going on with your smartphone and all those types of things, you're able to get that integrated at a much quicker pace and back in the hands of the customer.
So I actually have a little follow-on question for you there. So given that these challenges are kind of across the board, across industries, and that one of the key points of the presentation today was on change, how are you going to make your bank change? Do you have lots of questions about that? Do you have any sort of very general advice, like if you're going to be the champion of change in your business, what are the top 3 things that you must do? What are the top actions that you really must do in order to champion that change?
Okay, and I know it's really hard. And I know that it's very, very challenging, these companies, because I've been there. And I've talked to a lot of people that have been there and are there today. But in my experience, to get change through, you have to do a couple of key things. The first is what I talked about, leading. You have to lead on the diagonal, because you will say, I'm not accountable for it. It's not my responsibility. It's my boss. I don't have responsibility over that area. that's where your influencing leadership skills really must be developed. And you really must reach out in that network to others who do have the responsibility, who do have the accountability, and set up very effective communication, both written and going and seeing them, not a chain always of emails, but sit down and talk to them about these are the challenges we're facing. The second thing I think to drive change in an organization is to focus on the customer. It's always easy to get focused on the internal politics. My boss doesn't like it. We don't have the budget. We don't have the ability. I don't have the authority. All of those things we talked about before. Even with the regulator, focus on the customer. And then talk about alternatives and what we need to do because the customer has these expectations. The third thing to do is to try and set up, and again, whenever I drove real innovation and change, we would set up not thinking about boiling the ocean, but what's one pilot, one little thing that we could do to prove the concept. Put really strong metrics behind that. Really hold yourself accountable on it. So pilot it here, have the metrics, and then run the analytics so you can look at what this looks like as it spreads out. Because again, when you focus on the customer, when you focus on the numbers, it gets away from the internal emotional reaction into a logical, rational argument.
Thank you, and that's actually an excellent segue to the next question that I'm actually going to put to Katie. We have one here that said, do you recommend a phased approach, starting small? How can people dive into social initiatives? Should they just launch a full-blown community right away? So picking up from what Deanna said about piloting projects, et cetera, what's our experience with our customers and how they kind of grow their social footprint?
Yeah, so I think in financial services in particular, we have a kind of a stepped approach that we can walk through, and I'm happy to do that with someone on an individual basis. They can DM me or mention me at Katie Kime, and we can set that up. But I think there's a few things. One is that if you don't have a process in place to respond on social channels, and I mean a really robust tool that can be routed and metrics, and you can look at how things are being responded to, flushed, resolved, et cetera, it's almost getting to the point that it's inexcusable, right? No one in the banking world would allow you to put a phone in a call center and let it ring off the hook incessantly. And so, step one for us is what is your coverage of the inquiries and comments that are going on social channels? What's your rate there, and what's it costing you if you're not getting to those? I think step two is how do you think about honoring customer service issues and things that customers want from you? And I think that's a very good place to think about communities. Instead of thinking about marketing to them, how can I solve problems and listen to what my customers want from me? And I think it's we have a lot of experience in that.